Hi everyone, and welcome to our channel. This is lesson 2 in our series on how to create a U.S. Air Force Chief Flight Surgeon badge. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you to give me a thumbs up, and if you haven't already subscribed, hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so you'll be reminded of upcoming videos. And if you'd like to contribute, consider buying me a coffee. There's a link to that in the description below. So we're going to be dealing with the top part of the wing, the small little feathers. I draw my vectors as normal. I draw the small little vectors for the feathers themselves. And notice that I'm overlapping the vector for each one. This is going to become an important part of how to create the end result. Unfortunately, I haven't found an easier way to do this, or let's just say a quicker way to do this. But vector drawing and node editing is the foundations for everything within this software. And as usual, the more you practice, the better or more efficient you become at it. I select all the vectors and hit the N key to enter into the node edit mode, and then I select all those nodes and hit the S key to smooth them out. And as usual, I always will use the Fit Curves to Vector option to reduce the number of nodes within those vectors. Remember to save your work on a regular basis. It would be a shame for you to lose your work simply because you forgot to save it. The next thing I do is to select those vectors and copy them to a new layer. I have the exact copies on 2 different layers. I'll choose one of those copies, and now using my interactive vector trim tool and making sure I rejoin the trimmed vectors, I'm going to snip them away because my end goal is just to have what would be considered a boundary vector. I know I could have simply drug the scissors around, but I wanted to show you the clipping action that happens. Once that's done, I want to make sure it's a closed vector, so I join it at a common point. That's my bounding vector. And you can see how it fits well within the bitmap itself. Changing the color will always help you see the vector itself. So let's get started creating the component. I'm going to deal with that upper right hand rounded area first. You can do this a couple different ways, but here's an approach that I chose. I drew a circle, and created a domed component of that circle. Set it to merge with no base height and no limit, and hit apply. The next step is to select the image as well as the component and enter into the sculpting tool. Making sure that the show overlay image is checked so I can see the picture while I'm sculpting. I use the smudge tool, but you'll notice nothing happens. That's simply because I need to uncheck the preserve transparency, and now I can manipulate and smudge that component as need be. This is where you can add your own touch to it, your own artistic touch. This takes a bit of time, so don't rush it. Keep your work on a regular basis, and then continue. I would then go in and start to smooth things out, because I'm going to need to have a nice subtle change between this top part of the wing and the rest of the feathers. Once I'm happy, I hit OK, and that's the end result that we're looking for. The next thing I did was I drew a vector through the center of that component. I'm going to choose my boundary vector that I created originally, and I'm going to cut it apart. Click on the boundary vector, enter the node edit mode. I'm going to cut it here and cut it at the bottom right hand corner. The reason being is I'm going to use that edge vector as well as that new center vector that I drew and create a new component with a 2-rail sweep. And this is the shape that I'm looking to create. So we select our rails. Depending upon where our starting node is. You can see the starting node of our shape is on the left-hand side. So I'm going to select my bottom rail first, and then holding the Shift key down, select the top rail, use those as the rails, making sure they're going in the same direction, and choose my profile. You can see the gray is the darker, the brighter yellow is the higher in the Z, making sure I also choose to have that component merge with whatever else is there. Once I've done that, I hit apply. It's starting to take shape. It's an interesting effect. I might be able to use this further down the road on another model. But let's adjust this. The Z height of our new component is much too tall. So we go into the component properties, adjust the shape height. We may want to increase the base height because that left-hand side is very, very thin. So we just increase it a little bit. I can click on the small blue square to open up another window where I can actually use it as an interactive tool within the 3D view. I'm going to tilt it slightly. I want the right-hand side to go down and the left-hand side to come up. So I'll start my tilt right in the center of the component and go to the left. Now I can tilt it as need be. And once I'm happy, I'll bake it. Creating a copy of the visible model is something I do on a regular basis. You've seen me do it before, and I think it's valuable because it gives you the opportunity to save everything. Using that new copy, I'm going to the sculpting tool, and we use the smooth tool to just round out the edges a little bit, make a better transition between our first component and now this second component of the feathers. Again, it just takes a little bit of time and a little bit of thinking of what the end result should look like. I've purposely made this slightly different than the original badge, simply because I wanted it to be my design. You can see I have the preserved transparency on, and if I uncheck it, I can go around the edge of my component and simply smooth that out. I think it gives a nice effect to the feathers here. Using the sculpting tool without the preserved transparency checked, and if you go over the edge of the model, you start to create an extension of that component. I'll show you an easy way to get rid of that. Let me finish up this smoothing process first. This process, as you're watching, is in real time. I didn't speed it up, it's just the speed at which I work. I can either raise the smoothing or lower the smoothing. In the process of creating components, your sculpting, smoothing, or smudging, or whatever, does take the most amount of time. Once I'm done, I can keep it, hit OK. Now I can turn off my original two components and only work with this new copy of the visible model. You can see how the preserved transparency pushed out the component itself. So here's my little trick. I go into the component properties and lower the base height ever so slightly, just so that edge is underneath. It's sort of a lighter shade of the color. That means it's below the Z0 plane. Once I have that, I'll use the Replace Below option. Replace it with a transparent plane and hit Apply. And that excess material will be trimmed away. It's a very, very fast and efficient way of deleting stuff that you may not want. Once I'm happy with that, I'll go back into my 2D view. I can turn off the component itself. Sometimes it gets confusing. And we'll take a look at our other set of vectors that we've copied and moved to a new layer. We're going to draw some new ones, and we'll call that new layer Ribs. And again, simply drawing the vectors for these extra little indents, or ribs as I call them. Going beyond the right-hand side of where it starts, once I have the vectors created, I'm going to create a small arc, because I'm going to use the extrude and weave to generate a component of these vectors. First, as usual, click on the vectors, hit the N key to enter into node edit mode, select the nodes, hit the S key to smooth them, and of course, fit curves to vectors. Then I'm going to draw a small arc because I want to create a component of these ribs. Selecting the vectors of the ribs, going into my extrude and weave option, and then selecting the profile. It's going to be a subtract into the existing component itself. Let's see what it looks like. We turn on our copy of the visible model, and there's our applied ribs. Remember that original set of vectors that we drew? Let's choose those again, and we'll do a little bit more editing. We're going to use our scissors tool again, but this time we're not going to rejoin them. They're going to be just independent vectors by themselves. Close out our trim tool, select our vectors. We're going to do the same thing as we did previously with our extrude and weave. So select our vectors and then choose our shape. And it will be the same, a negative arc set into the original set of wings. Select the vectors, select the arc, and create a component. Once I'm happy with that, as usual, I'll create a new level and make a copy of the visible model. This copy now goes back into the sculpting tab, and I want to smooth out the original ribs that I've created. Not too much, just a little bit of a contrast between these and the little feathers. Once I'm happy, I'm going to export it as a 3D clip art, as I did previously. You can see I've already created, so it's going to give me a warning of saying, do I want to replace it? Of course. And there's our top wing. So let's see if we can put these two together. I open a new session of Aspire. This one will be the full size of the badge itself. I bring in my first 3D clip art of the lower wings that we created in our previous video, and I position it correctly. I bring in my other 3D clip art, the one we just finished, the top wing, and position that as well. A few things to remember. Both components are set to add, so we're going to need to change them to merge. I've decided to choose both of them and set them to merge, just in case, because we have a bit of an overlap between the lower wings and the top wing. Now, the question is, how do we correct this? Well, a couple different ways. I could fade the larger wings so that they go underneath the top wing, or I can raise the top wing higher in the Z height, or I think I can tilt the top wing so that it raises up above the lower wing. Let's give that a try. Click on the little blue square, open up the interactive property window, and I'm going to tilt from the right-hand side to the left-hand side. Remember, tilt is always in the up direction. I think that's what I'm going to choose. I can work with this. I may just reduce the tilt ever so slightly. And I think I'm going to increase the base height. I'm going to choose my lower wing and increase that base height as well. It looks a little thin to me, and I would be worried that it would break off when we do the cutting. One thing to remember is when you start to move components around, what's underneath it may actually start to pierce through the surface. Here you can see where the lower wing is actually showing and protruding. So be careful and mindful of where you place things and what's underneath it. I can click on the level and increase the base height of everything on that level, as opposed to having to do each one separately. I insert a new level, and yes, I make a copy of the visible model. And now I can mirror it to the right-hand side by creating a mirrored copy. One difficulty you may have, or one option you may have when working from a photograph, is that many times the photograph is not symmetrical. So you're going to need to decide what part of it is going to be the true proportions and the true perspective. You can see my right wing doesn't line up with the image, but it is definitely mirrored across. So I'll just have to play it by ear to make sure that my left and the right are symmetrical. And there's our wings. Not too complicated. A little bit of a challenge possibly. Hopefully you take your time and try this, because these wings can be used in many, many different applications. Many different badges, many different situations. Next up is going to be that center part. We have the snake and the symbol on the crest or plaque, as well as the star and the banner above. Our next lesson is going to be dealing with that center lower section, the plaque itself with the snake. So we're about half done. Give it a try, work through it. If you have any questions, send me an email, mm@mezalick.com. I'll be glad to help. I'd like to see how you're progressing if you are following along. I hope you've learned something. I hope you're willing to try it, and I hope you enjoy it. If you'd like to learn more about the software, subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to click on the bell to be reminded of our new videos. And of course, as always, if you need help, send me an email, mm@mezalick.com. I'll be glad to help. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Enjoy.